My name is Darren Williams, and at 68 years old, I never thought my own son would leave me homeless. After building my construction business from nothing, I trusted Jason with everything, including putting my house in his name. I believed I was securing my legacy, but instead, I found myself betrayed and standing on my friend's porch with nothing but 2 suitcases. What my son never expected was that this old contractor still had a few tricks up his sleeve. Where are you watching from today? Drop a comment below, subscribe if this resonates, and prepare for a story about the ultimate betrayal and comeuppance. I grew up in a small town in Michigan, where everybody knew each other by name, and most folks worked with their hands. My father was a carpenter, and I started working alongside him when I was just 16 years old. Those early mornings on job sites taught me the value of honest work and attention to detail. My dad would always say, "Darren, if you cut corners on the job, you cut corners on your character." Those words stuck with me throughout my life. By the time I was 25, I had saved enough to start Williams Construction. It was just me and 2 other guys at first, working out of my garage with a single pickup truck. We took any job we could get, from fixing porches to building garden sheds. Those early years were tough, but I put everything I had into growing that business. I met Eleanor when I was renovating her parents' kitchen. She came home from college for the weekend and walked in while I was installing cabinets. Our eyes met, and I nearly drove a nail through my thumb. She had this laugh that could warm the coldest Michigan winter. 3 months later, we were dating, and by the next year, I had asked her to marry me. Eleanor became my rock, my biggest supporter. While I was building houses, she was building our home. We bought a modest piece of land on the edge of town, and over 2 years, I constructed our dream house with my own hands, working evenings and weekends. Eleanor would bring me dinner in a basket and sit with me as the sun set behind the half-finished walls. Those were some of the happiest moments of my life. As Williams Construction grew, so did our family. Jason came along 3 years into our marriage. I still remember holding him in the hospital, this tiny human with Eleanor's eyes and my stubborn chin. I promised him the world that day, swore I would give him every opportunity I never had. By the time Jason was in high school, Williams Construction had become a respected name in 3 counties. We had 28 employees, a fleet of trucks, and enough contracts to keep us busy year-round. I was proud of what I had built, but even prouder when Jason started showing interest in the business. He would come to job sites during summer breaks, not to work with tools like I had with my father, but to observe the financial side of things. He had a mind for numbers and strategy that I never possessed. When Jason got accepted to a prestigious business school, Eleanor and I decided to foot the entire bill. It was expensive, cleaning out most of our savings, but we believed in investing in our son's future. I can still picture him in his graduation gown, that bright smile as he waved his diploma. Eleanor squeezed my hand and whispered, "We did good, Darren." Jason met Kimberly during his final year of college. She came from money, the kind of family that had vacations, homes, and hired people like me to build them. I had my reservations at first, worried she might look down on our humble beginnings, but she seemed to make Jason happy. They married 2 years after graduation, and soon gave us our grandchildren, Thomas and Grace. Thomas reminded me so much of Jason at that age, bright and curious. Grace was quieter, an artist at heart who would sit for hours with her coloring books. I cherished being their grandfather, taking Thomas fishing at the same lake where I had taught Jason, and building a special art desk for Grace that she decorated with stickers and paint. Life was good until Eleanor got sick. Cancer, the doctors said. We fought it for 3 years, treatments that took her beautiful hair but never her spirit. I scaled back my involvement in the company to care for her, with Jason stepping in to handle more of the business operations. When we lost her 8 years ago, a part of me went with her. The heart attack hit me like a freight train when I was 65. Nothing major, the doctors assured me, but enough of a warning to take things easier. That health scare forced me to confront my own mortality in a way I had been avoiding since Eleanor passed. Jason noticed my contemplation and suggested we start planning for the future. "Dad, we need to think about protecting what you've built," he said during one of our Sunday dinners after the grandkids had gone to play. "Estate taxes will eat up half of everything if we don't plan properly." I nodded, trusting his expertise. Jason had built his own financial consulting firm by then, advising businesses much larger than mine. He arranged meetings with his friend Martin, a financial advisor who laid out complex charts and scenarios about probate courts and inheritance complications. The simplest solution, Martin explained during our third meeting, would be to transfer the house into Jason's name. You can continue living there, of course, but this avoids probate entirely and significantly reduces the tax burden. It made sense to me. The business had already been restructured years ago to minimize taxes, with Jason holding a significant stake. The house was my last major asset, and if putting it in Jason's name protected it from the government's grasp, I was all for it. We made it official on Jason's 40th birthday. I handed him the deed as a symbolic gesture, a passing of the torch from one generation to the next. That evening, we had a special dinner at Eleanor's favorite restaurant. I remember giving a speech that made everyone tear up, talking about family legacy and how proud Eleanor would be of the man Jason had become. "Dad, I promise you'll always have a home with us," Jason said, his voice cracking with emotion as he raised his glass. "This is just paperwork. Nothing changes." Kimberly nodded in agreement, lifting her glass as well. "To family," she said. I believed them completely. Why wouldn't I? This was my son, my flesh and blood. The boy I had taught to ride a bike, the teenager whose broken heart I had consoled after his first girlfriend dumped him, the man who had stood strong beside me at Eleanor's funeral. How could I have known that signatures on that deed would be the beginning of the end of everything I thought I knew about family? The changes were subtle at first, so subtle I almost convinced myself I was imagining things. Jason started postponing our regular Sunday family dinners. "Work is crazy right now, Dad," he would say. "Can we push it to next weekend?" One postponement became 2, then 3, until our once sacred tradition became an occasional event that required persistent reminders from me. When we did get together, I noticed Kimberly eyeing the house with a critical gaze. "The kitchen is so outdated," she commented during one visit, running her finger along the countertop I had installed with Eleanor 30 years ago. "And this wallpaper has to go." I laughed it off. "Well, it served me just fine all these years." "But it could be so much more," she insisted, exchanging a look with Jason that made me uncomfortable. One spring afternoon, I was pruning the maple tree Eleanor and I had planted when we first moved in. The tree had grown along with our family, providing shade for picnics when Jason was small, and later supporting his tire swing. Jason came out and stood watching me work. "Dad, I was thinking this tree needs to come down," he said casually. "It's getting too close to the house, probably affecting the foundation." I nearly fell off my ladder. "This tree? Your mother and I planted this when we moved in. It's perfectly healthy." "It's a liability," he countered, "and it blocks what could be a great view from the master bedroom." Our disagreement escalated into the first real argument we'd had in years. I couldn't understand why he was suddenly concerned about a tree that had been standing for decades, and he couldn't seem to grasp its sentimental value. Around the same time, Jason began borrowing my professional tools. As a retired contractor, I still maintained a well-equipped workshop in the garage. I took pride in keeping my tools organized and properly maintained. I would notice a missing circular saw or my pneumatic nail gun gone without asking. When I brought it up, Jason would casually mention he had needed it for a small project at his house. "Just ask next time," I told him after the third occurrence. "And please bring them back when you're done." "Sure, Dad," he'd say, but the tools would often return damaged or not at all. Frank, my best friend since high school and former foreman at Williams Construction, noticed the tension during a barbecue at my place. After Jason and his family left, Frank stayed behind to help me clean up. "Everything okay between you and Jason?" he asked, handing me a plate to dry. "Of course," I said automatically. "Why?" Frank shrugged. "Just seemed like there was some tension. The way he shut you down when you were telling that story about the Johnson project. A few days later, Frank and I were at our regular fishing spot on Lake Mitchell. The peaceful setting loosened my tongue. I think Jason and Kimberly have plans for the house, I admitted, watching my line bob in the water. They keep talking about modernizing and renovations. It's still your house, Darren, Frank said. Legally, Jason's name might be on the paper, but it's your home. I defended Jason immediately. He's under a lot of pressure with his business. The economy's been tough on financial services. He's just thinking about property values. Frank gave me a long look but didn't push further. I started noticing that visits with my grandchildren became shorter and more supervised. Before, Thomas and Grace would often stay overnight with me on weekends. Thomas and I would build model airplanes, while Grace and I would bake Eleanor's famous chocolate chip cookies. Now, these visits were scheduled with specific start and end times, usually with either Jason or Kimberly present. We need to maintain their routine, Jason explained when I asked about it. Kids need structure. Jason also began questioning my expenditures, raising eyebrows when I mentioned buying a new fishing rod or planning a small trip with Frank. Dad, you need to be careful with your money, he said during one such conversation. You're on a fixed income now. I've been managing my money since before you were born, I reminded him, trying to keep my tone light. I think I can handle buying a fishing rod. I'm just saying, retirement can last a long time. You don't want to outlive your savings. What hurt most was an incident at Thomas's baseball game. Thomas had just hit his first home run, and in my excitement, I cheered loudly and started sharing stories with neighboring parents about Jason's own Little League days. Jason pulled me aside between innings. Dad, you're embarrassing Thomas. And some of those stories about me weren't appropriate. I felt like I'd been slapped. The stories were innocent, funny anecdotes about Jason's determination as a child. Nothing that should have embarrassed anyone. One afternoon, I came home early from a doctor's appointment to find Kimberly taking photos of different rooms in my house. She seemed startled to see me. Just getting some ideas, she said vaguely, slipping her phone into her pocket. The lighting in here is so interesting. Later that week, I found several home renovation magazines in the guest room after they visited. Pages were marked with sticky notes, most showing complete kitchen and bathroom overhauls. One featured an article titled, Converting Traditional Homes to Modern Open Concept Spaces. When I casually mentioned the magazines to Jason, he claimed they were left by accident. Kimberly's been looking at ideas for our place, he said, but their house had been fully renovated just 2 years earlier. The excuses became more transparent and frequent. Jason would promise to help me with household repairs, then cancel last minute. Calls went unreturned for days. When I would visit their home, conversations would awkwardly halt when I entered rooms. Through it all, I continued to make excuses for him, both to Frank and to myself. He's busy with work, I'd say. The financial sector is demanding. Or, he's just trying to make sure his family is secure. But at night, lying in the bedroom where Eleanor and I had spent 40 years together, I couldn't ignore the growing knot of anxiety in my stomach. Something was changing, and despite my best efforts to deny it, I was afraid of where it might be heading. The first unmistakable sign that something was seriously wrong came on a Tuesday afternoon in October. I was raking leaves in the front yard when a sleek BMW pulled into my driveway. Jason stepped out, accompanied by a woman I didn't recognize, dressed in a sharp business suit. Dad, Jason called out, waving casually as if this were a normal visit. This is Lisa Harrington. She's a real estate agent friend of mine. I set my rake aside, wiping my hands on my jeans before extending one to Lisa. Nice to meet you. Are you looking to buy in the neighborhood? Lisa glanced at Jason before answering. I'm just assessing property values in the area. Your son asked me to take a look around. Before I could process what that meant, Jason was guiding Lisa toward the house. We'll just take a quick tour, Dad. Won't be long. I stood in the yard, rake in hand, as they disappeared inside my home. My home. Through the living room window, I could see Lisa taking notes and photographs. They spent nearly an hour inside while I continued raking, my movements becoming increasingly aggressive as my confusion turned to anger. When they finally emerged, Jason thanked Lisa and walked her to her car. They spoke in hushed tones, and I caught only fragments about potential and market readiness. After she drove away, I confronted Jason directly. What was that all about? Just getting an idea of the property's current value, he said casually. It's good to stay informed about the market. And why would we need to know that? I pressed. Jason sighed, as if I was being difficult. Dad, have you ever thought about whether this house still makes sense for you? It's a lot of space for one person to maintain. That conversation opened the floodgates. Over the next few weeks, Jason began bringing brochures for senior living communities, leaving them on my coffee table during visits. Golden Sunset Acres has activities every day, he pointed out, showing me glossy photos of smiling elderly people playing bingo, and a full-time medical staff. I don't need a medical staff, I snapped. I had one minor heart attack 3 years ago, and my doctor says I'm healthier than most men my age. It's not about needing it now, Jason countered. It's about planning ahead. Our argument escalated when I flatly refused to even look at more brochures. I built this house with my own hands, I reminded him, my voice rising. Your mother and I raised you here. I'm not leaving. Jason's expression hardened. Well, eventually decisions will need to be made about my house. My house. Not our house. My house. The words hit me like a physical blow. Your house? I repeated. Legally, yes, he said, his tone matter of fact. We both know the deed is in my name. I stared at my son, suddenly seeing a stranger in his place. That was for estate planning, to avoid probate. You know that. He shrugged. Nevertheless, it's my property. I'm being generous letting you stay. That night after Jason left, I sat in Eleanor's old rocking chair, trying to make sense of what was happening. The house felt different somehow, as if the walls themselves had heard Jason's claim and were no longer sure who they belonged to. The situation deteriorated rapidly after that. Maintenance issues that I would have handled immediately in the past were suddenly left unaddressed. The roof developed a leak over the guest bedroom. When I mentioned it to Jason, he said he'd look into it when the budget allows. The furnace broke in the middle of January, leaving me without heat for 3 days before a repairman finally showed up. Jason authorized the minimum repair. The technician told me apologetically, "This is just a patch job. The whole system should really be replaced." I called Jason immediately after the repairman left. I nearly froze to death waiting for that repair. "Don't be dramatic, Dad," he replied. "It wasn't that cold, and you could have gone to a hotel if needed." "With what money?" I demanded. "Most of my savings went to your college education and helping you start your business." The line went quiet for a moment. "Maybe that's something you should have considered before spending so irresponsibly throughout your retirement." I was speechless. Irresponsible? I had always been careful with money, a habit formed during the lean early years of my business. The only significant expenditures in my retirement had been gifts for my grandchildren and occasional fishing trips with Frank. The final revelation came unexpectedly. I had driven to Jason's house to drop off a birthday gift for Thomas. No one answered the doorbell, but I noticed Jason's car in the driveway. Thinking he might be in the backyard, I walked around the side of the house. Jason's car was unlocked, and through the window, I could see blueprints spread across the passenger seat. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened the door and picked up the top sheet. It was my house. My home, completely reimagined with walls knocked down, an expanded master suite, and a note about removing the outdated fireplace. The plans were labeled Williams Residence Renovation with yesterday's date. I was still holding the blueprints when Jason came around the corner. His face went from surprise to anger in an instant. "What are you doing in my car?" he demanded. I held up the blueprints. "What are you doing with plans to renovate my home without even telling me?" Jason snatched the papers from my hand. "I don't need your permission to plan changes to my property." "Your property?" My voice rose. "That's my home. I built it with these hands for your mother and me. It's a house, Dad, Jason said coldly. Just a building, and legally, it's mine now. This was never about estate planning, was it? The truth hit me with stunning clarity. You've been planning this all along. For the first time, Jason didn't bother denying it. Legally, this is my house now. I'm being generous letting you stay as long as I have. I felt physically ill. Your mother would be ashamed of you. Something flashed in Jason's eyes, a momentary glimpse of the son I thought I knew, but it vanished quickly. Kimberly and I have plans for that property. It's in a desirable neighborhood that's only becoming more valuable. We've been patient, but it's time to move forward. Kimberly, put you up to this? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Kimberly recognizes a good investment, Jason replied. She's practical. I left without giving Thomas his present, my hands shaking so badly I could barely drive. When I got home, I called Samuel Wright, Jason's business partner whom I'd met several times at company functions. I hoped he might be able to talk some sense into my son. The conversation revealed even more painful truths. To be honest, Mr. Williams, I've been concerned about Jason's decisions lately, Samuel admitted reluctantly. The firm isn't doing as well as he might have led you to believe. We lost several major clients last quarter. He told me the business was thriving, I said. Samuel's silence spoke volumes. Is he in financial trouble? I pressed. I shouldn't be discussing this, Samuel hedged. But as his father, let's just say there have been some risky investments and lifestyle choices that have put pressure on their finances. The pieces fell into place. The house wasn't just about Jason wanting it for himself. He needed its value to address financial problems he'd been hiding. The final blow came when Jason informed me I wouldn't be allowed to attend Grace's 9th birthday party. Kimberly thinks it would be better if we keep it small this year, he explained over the phone. Just immediate family. I am immediate family, I protested. I'm her grandfather. We'll FaceTime you during the cake, Jason offered, as if that were a reasonable compromise. That night, I sat alone in the darkened living room, surrounded by the life Eleanor and I had built together. The walls that had witnessed our joy, arguments, reconciliations, and growth as a family now seemed to be closing in. For the first time, I allowed myself to face the magnitude of my mistake. I had handed over not just a house but my security, my heritage, and my final connection to Eleanor, all to a son who saw it as nothing more than a financial asset. Sleep eluded me as I wrestled with a growing sense of betrayal and helplessness. The home that had always been my sanctuary now felt like a waiting room, a temporary space I was occupying on someone else's terms. And the worst part was, knowing that someone was my own flesh and blood. The certified letter arrived on a Wednesday morning, its official appearance standing out among the usual bills and junk mail. I knew before opening it that something was terribly wrong. My hands trembled slightly as I tore the envelope and unfolded the formal document inside. Notice to vacate. The legal language was cold and impersonal, but the message was devastatingly clear. I was being officially evicted from my home of 40 years. The letter gave me 30 days to remove all persons and personal property from the premises. It was signed by a law firm I didn't recognize, representing Jason Williams as the legal property owner. I read it 3 times, hoping the words would somehow rearrange themselves into something less brutal. They didn't. My own son was evicting me from the home I had built with my own hands. I called Jason immediately, my fingers punching the numbers with furious energy. Is this some kind of sick joke? I demanded when he answered, my voice shaking with emotion. I assume you got the letter, he replied, his tone businesslike. I thought it would be better coming from the attorneys. Cleaner. Cleaner? I nearly shouted. You're throwing your father out onto the street and you wanted it to be cleaner? Dad, don't be dramatic. You've had plenty of time to make arrangements. I've been more than patient. Patient? Jason, this is my home. No, he said firmly. It's my home. The deed has been in my name for 3 years now. We've found buyers who want to close quickly, and they're not interested in a property with a tenant situation. A tenant situation? I repeated. the words barely making it past the lump in my throat. Is that what I am to you now? A tenant? Look, Jason's voice took on the condescending tone he often used with difficult clients. You have two options. You can leave voluntarily within the time frame, or we can proceed with a formal eviction through the courts. The second option gets messy and goes on your record. My record? I'm 68 years old. What record are you talking about? Just be out by the date on the letter, Dad. Take what's important to you. The buyers want most of the furniture left anyway. The line went dead. I stared at the phone in disbelief, then at the eviction notice still clutched in my other hand. This couldn't be happening. Not from my own son. I called Patricia Wilson, an attorney who had handled some contracts for Williams Construction before I retired. She agreed to see me that afternoon. Patricia's office was in a converted Victorian house downtown, her practice focusing primarily on elder law and estate planning. She listened with growing concern as I explained the situation, occasionally taking notes or asking clarifying questions. I'm so sorry you're going through this, Darren, she said when I finished. Unfortunately, from a legal perspective, the situation is clear. The house legally belongs to Jason, but I only put it in his name for estate planning purposes. I protested. He knows that. Patricia's expression was sympathetic, but realistic. Intent matters in some legal situations, but not in property ownership. Unless you have documentation showing it was a conditional transfer or that there was fraud involved, the deed transfer is valid and binding. So he can just throw me out? After everything I've done for him? Legally, yes, she admitted. We could challenge it, argue there was an implied life estate, or that the transfer was made under false pretenses, but those are difficult cases to win and expensive to pursue. I left Patricia's office with a few legal options to consider, none of them promising, and the crushing realization that my son had outmaneuvered me completely. When I returned home, I discovered that home no longer existed in any meaningful sense. The locks had been changed. Through the windows, I could see two young men boxing up books from the shelves Eleanor had painted herself. I pounded on the door until Jason finally opened it, looking irritated by the interruption. What are you doing? I demanded. I have 30 days. We're just getting a head start on packing, he said. Don't worry, we're being careful with everything. Those strangers are handling Eleanor's books, I said, my voice breaking. Things she treasured. They're professional movers, Dad. They know what they're doing. Rain had started to fall, soaking through my light jacket as we stood in the doorway. Jason made no move to invite me in out of the weather. Can I at least come in and get some clothes? I asked finally. Jason disappeared briefly, returning with 2 large garbage bags. I packed some of your things. The rest we'll sort through later. I stood there in the rain, holding garbage bags filled with my possessions, while my son watched impassively from the doorway of the home I had built. Where am I supposed to go? I asked, hating the plaintive note in my voice but unable to suppress it. You've had months to figure that out, Jason replied. There are plenty of affordable senior apartments in the area. Through the window behind him, I caught a glimpse of Grace, watching us from the staircase. Her small face was troubled, tears visible even from a distance. Kimberly appeared, saying something sharp that I couldn't hear, and pulled Grace away from the window. Jason closed the door without another word, leaving me standing in the rain. I became aware of neighbors watching from their windows and porches, people who had known me for decades, who had attended barbecues in my backyard, and whose children I had hired for summer jobs at Williams Construction. The humiliation was almost as painful as the betrayal. I was still standing there, paralyzed by shock and indecision, when Frank's pickup truck pulled up to the curb. He took in the scene instantly, his weathered face darkening with anger. Get in the truck, Darren, he said quietly. We'll figure this out. As we loaded my pathetic garbage bags into the truck bed, 2 more vehicles arrived. The real estate agent, Lisa, emerged from one, accompanied by a well-dressed couple who I assumed were the buyers. From the other car stepped a young man with a clipboard, who began taking measurements and photos of the exterior. They're not wasting any time, Frank muttered. I couldn't bring myself to speak. Every measurement that young man took felt like a personal violation, an erasure of the careful work I had put into creating this home. The buyers want to close in 3 weeks, Lisa was saying loudly enough for us to overhear. They're planning a complete renovation. The interior is quite dated. The physical pain of loading my belongings into Frank's truck was nothing compared to the emotional agony of those words. Dated. As if the life Eleanor and I had built together was just an unfashionable style choice, something to be demolished and replaced. As Frank drove away, I took one final look at the house. Through the living room window, I could see Jason showing the buyers around, gesturing enthusiastically at spaces he planned to change. 40 years of memories reduced to an investment opportunity. That night, lying on Frank's fold-out couch, I stared at the unfamiliar ceiling and allowed myself to contemplate things I had never thought possible. What was the point of continuing? I had lost everything that mattered, betrayed by the person I trusted most in the world. The dark thoughts swirled, offering a seductive escape from the pain that seemed to have no end. Only the memory of Eleanor's voice, her unwavering belief that difficulties always contained hidden purpose, kept me from surrendering completely to despair. "Life doesn't happen to you, Darren," she would say. "It happens for you." I clung to those words as I drifted into an exhausted sleep, not believing them yet, but desperately wanting to. The first week at Frank's house passed in a blur of sleepless nights and hollow days. I barely ate, despite the efforts of Frank's wife Laura to tempt me with my favorite foods. When I did sleep, nightmares jolted me awake. Scenes of Jason laughing as wrecking balls demolished the house, Eleanor's garden bulldozed under mountains of dirt. Laura set me up in their spare bedroom, insisting it was no trouble. But I felt the weight of my imposition with every breakfast I couldn't finish, every concerned glance exchanged over my bowed head. "You need to eat something, Darren," Laura would say, placing toast or eggs before me. "Keeping up your strength is important." I would force down a few bites to ease her worry, then push the plate away. Food had lost all taste, all purpose. Frank brought news from the neighborhood, trying to be gentle, but knowing I needed to hear it. Moving trucks had arrived. Workers were carrying out furniture, some to storage, some directly to the curb. My workshop tools, lovingly maintained for decades, had been sold in a hasty lot to another contractor. "I tried to buy them," Frank admitted. "Thought you might want them back, but Jason had already closed the deal." The final blow came when Frank reluctantly shared that the house had sold for $150,000 above market value. "Bidding war," he explained. "That location has become prime real estate." A quick calculation told me that the profit from my house would easily solve whatever financial troubles Jason's business was facing, with plenty left over. Yet not a penny had been offered to help his now homeless father. Days merged into an indistinguishable procession of empty hours. I stopped checking my phone, stopped changing clothes regularly, stopped caring about the basic routines that had structured my life. What was the point? Everything I had worked for, everything I had built, had been stripped away by the person I had sacrificed the most to support. Frank and Laura tried their best to engage me, inviting friends over for dinner, suggesting outings to the lake, anything to pull me out of the deepening depression. But I had retreated into a shell that seemed impenetrable. "He can stay as long as he needs," I overheard Laura telling Frank one night. "But I'm worried about him. This isn't the Darren we know." "He's been through hell," Frank replied. "Betrayal like that from your own kid. I don't know if I'd be any better." The turning point came unexpectedly, 3 weeks into my stay with Frank and Laura. I had finally forced myself to get out of the house, if only to give them some space from my gloomy presence. I found myself at the Lakeside Diner, a place Eleanor and I had frequented throughout our marriage. I was absently stirring a cup of coffee when someone called my name. Looking up, I saw Tony Ramirez, who had started at Williams Construction as an apprentice and worked his way up to site supervisor before I retired. "Mr. Williams, I heard you were back in town," Tony said, sliding into the booth across from me. His smile faded as he took in my appearance. "Are you okay, sir?" The genuine concern in his voice cracked something in me. Before I knew it, I was telling Tony everything, the words pouring out like water through a broken dam. To his credit, he listened without interruption, his expression moving from shock to anger to determination. When I finally ran out of words, Tony leaned forward. "That's not right, Mr. Williams. Not after everything you've done for this community, for your employees, for your family." "It's done now," I said flatly. "The house is sold. Jason's made his choice. Maybe the house is gone," Tony acknowledged. "But that doesn't mean you roll over and let him think this was okay." Something in Tony's fierce loyalty stirred a long, dormant spark in me. Not quite hope, but perhaps its distant cousin. Possibility. "What would you suggest?" I asked, more to humor him than anything else. "I don't know yet," Tony admitted. "But I do know Jason's reputation in the business community isn't as golden as he thinks. I've heard things." That caught my attention. "What kind of things?" Tony hesitated. "I probably shouldn't say." "Please, Tony. I need to know." "Word is, his financial firm has been cutting corners, giving questionable advice to maximize their fees rather than client outcomes. Some people have lost serious money following his recommendations." This new information settled like a stone in my stomach. Not only had Jason betrayed me personally, but he had corrupted the fundamental business ethics I had instilled in him from childhood. The disappointment was profound, but within that disappointment, a seed of motivation took root. If Jason had strayed so far from the values I had taught him, perhaps there was a purpose left for me after all. Over the next few days, I began conducting research. Using Frank's computer, I looked into Jason's business, Williams Financial Advisors. What I found disturbed me deeply. Online reviews revealed numerous complaints about aggressive fee structures, investments that benefited the firm more than the clients, and promises of returns that never materialized. I reached out to some of my old industry contacts, people who had worked with me for years and who I knew would be straight with me. Their responses confirmed Tony's suggestion that Jason's reputation was suffering. "I pulled my pension management from them last year," admitted George Kapoor, a longtime subcontractor. "Something didn't feel right about their approach." With each conversation, my sense of purpose grew stronger. I began to see a path forward, not aimed at revenge, but at something more meaningful: accountability. Frank noticed the change in me immediately. "You're actually eating breakfast," he observed one morning. "And you shaved." "I've been thinking," I told him, "about what happens next." That afternoon, Frank and I sat at his kitchen table with a legal pad between us. "I don't want to destroy him," I explained as we brainstormed approaches. "He's still my son, and my grandchildren's father, but I can't let this stand. Not just for me, but for everyone he's hurting with his business practices." "So what's the plan?" Frank asked. "I don't want revenge," I said, the clarity of this realization surprising even me. "I want him to learn, to remember who he is and what our family stands for." As I spoke those words, I felt strength returning to my body. The fog of depression began to lift, replaced by determination and purpose. I started eating regularly, taking walks to rebuild my physical stamina, and reconnecting with old friends and colleagues. In the process, I discovered something unexpected. Despite Jason's betrayal, I still had a network of people who respected me, who valued the integrity with which I had run my business and lived my life. That respect became a foundation upon which I could rebuild. Through Tony, I learned that Jason's business headquarters was located in a commercial complex on the edge of town. More importantly, I discovered that the adjacent property was for sale, a small office building that had previously housed an insurance company. "It's been vacant for 6 months," Tony reported. "Owners asking $200,000. Almost exactly the amount I had in retirement savings. The money I had been carefully preserving to see me through my final years. That's everything I have left," I told Frank that evening. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "It's risky." I thought about Eleanor, about the values we had shared and taught our son, about the lessons that apparently hadn't stuck. "Some things are worth the risk," I decided. The next day, I contacted my financial advisor and began the process of liquidating my retirement accounts. The penalties for early withdrawal were substantial, but I was past caring about conventional financial wisdom. I had a more important investment to make. As I took these first concrete steps toward my new purpose, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The betrayal still hurt, the loss still ached, but for the first time since receiving that eviction notice, I could see beyond the pain to something resembling a future. A future with meaning, with purpose, and perhaps most importantly, with a lesson my son would never forget. 2 months after being evicted from my home, I stood in the empty office space I had just purchased, sunlight streaming through dusty windows. The building needed work, considerable work, but evaluating structural needs and envisioning renovations was something I knew better than most. "It's got good bones," Tony observed, walking the perimeter with a practiced eye. "Needs updating, but nothing major." "That's what I thought," I agreed. "The location is the real value." The property shared a parking lot with the sleek glass building that housed Williams Financial Advisors. From the front windows of my new acquisition, Jason's company logo was clearly visible across the asphalt. I had made the purchase through a shell company Tony helped me establish, keeping my name out of the official paperwork. As far as Jason knew, the neighboring property had been bought by an anonymous investor. Within days, I had assembled a small crew of loyal former employees from Williams Construction, men and women who remembered how I had run my business, who had benefited from my policy of promoting from within and sharing profits during good years. "We're calling it Second Chance Construction," I told them during our first meeting in the bare conference room, "because everyone deserves one." Tony, who had recently been laid off from his latest construction job, agreed to serve as the public face of the company. At 68, I knew my age might raise questions from potential clients, while Tony's energy and technical knowledge made him a perfect frontman. "But everyone knows this is your show, Mr. Williams," he insisted. "We're following your lead." We began the renovation work ourselves, saving costs while showcasing our skills. New wiring, updated plumbing, energy-efficient windows, all installed by people who took pride in their craftsmanship. I worked alongside them, my body remembering the rhythms of physical labor despite the protests of my aging joints. As we transformed the building, I was also transforming myself. The depression that had engulfed me gave way to renewed purpose. I was building again, not just a business, but a statement. The strategic positioning of Second Chance Construction wasn't lost on any of us. We were literally next door to Jason's firm, a constant reminder of the construction ethics and values he had abandoned. Through my industry connections, I began learning more about Jason's business troubles. He had over-leveraged the company with expensive office space and flashy client events, while simultaneously making increasingly risky investment recommendations to maintain promised returns. "He's lost 3 major clients in the last month," reported George Kapoor, who still had friends at the firm. "People are starting to talk." I took no pleasure in my son's difficulties, but I recognized the opportunity they presented. The construction industry had always operated on reputation and word of mouth. If Jason had forgotten that fundamental truth, perhaps it was time for a reminder. Our first strategic move came when I learned through the grapevine that one of Jason's clients, the Andersons, were unhappy with renovation work Jason had recommended on their vacation property. The contractor he had referred them to had cut corners, used substandard materials, and left the job half-finished after collecting full payment. "This contractor is a cousin of Kimberly's," Tony explained. "Jason gets a kickback for the referrals." The practice was technically legal, but ethically questionable, especially when the work was inferior. It went against everything I had taught Jason about business integrity. I reached out to the Andersons anonymously at first, offering to inspect the property as a courtesy. When they saw the extent of the problems, I provided a detailed estimate for repairs, deliberately pricing it at cost. "Why would you do this for us?" Mr. Anderson asked suspiciously. "Let's just say I believe in making things right," I replied. "And I'd appreciate your discretion about who's doing the work." The Anderson job became our calling card. We completed the repairs properly, documented the substandard work that had been done previously, and made sure the Andersons understood exactly what had happened without directly naming Jason or his connection. Word spread quickly. Other dissatisfied clients of Jason's contractor referrals began reaching out. Each time, we provided quality work at fair prices, slowly building a reputation as the ethical alternative to the corner-cutting practices Jason had been facilitating. As Second Chance Construction grew, I was careful to document every business violation we uncovered: permits that hadn't been pulled, materials that didn't meet code, safety regulations ignored. I wasn't planning to report these violations, not yet, but the documentation provided leverage if needed. Throughout this period, I made quiet efforts to maintain a connection with my grandchildren. I discovered that Thomas's baseball team practiced at the public park on Tuesday afternoons. I would casually appear with a book, sitting far enough away to not be obvious but close enough to watch him play. For Grace, I found a more indirect approach. I learned through Frank's granddaughter that Grace had an exceptional art teacher, Miss Patel, who ran the elementary school's art program. I made a substantial anonymous donation to the program, specifically for supplies, and occasionally dropped off specialty art materials from a local benefactor. These small connections to my grandchildren's lives helped ease the pain of separation. I wasn't ready to confront Jason directly, not until my plan had fully matured, but knowing that Thomas and Grace were thriving provided comfort during difficult moments. As the months passed, the contrast between our businesses became increasingly apparent. Second Chance Construction operated with transparency, quality workmanship, and fair pricing. We built relationships rather than just completing transactions. Meanwhile, rumors about Williams' financial advisors continued to circulate. Staff turnover increased, and more clients began quietly moving their accounts elsewhere. One evening, as I was working late in my office, I overheard a heated argument in the parking lot. Looking out the window, I saw Jason and Kimberly standing beside their luxury SUV. "We cannot afford another quarter like this," Kimberly shouted, her voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "The country club dues are 3 months behind, and the private school is threatening to dismiss the children." "I'm handling it," Jason snapped back. "These things take time to turn around. We should never have spent so much on the house renovations before securing the Monroe account," Kimberly continued. "Your father's house was supposed to be our safety net, not a showcase for your ego." They continued arguing as they got into their vehicle, unaware that I had witnessed their conversation. The revelation that my home, my life's work, had been sacrificed for country club dues and showcasing ego sent a fresh wave of pain through me. But it also confirmed that my approach was working. Financial pressure was building, forcing Jason to confront the consequences of his choices. The final piece of my plan came together when I learned through industry channels that Jason was pitching his services to Landmark Development, a major commercial real estate company, looking for financial guidance on a new project. "It would be a huge account," Tony explained. "Exactly what he needs to dig out of his current hole." I nodded, an idea forming. "Find out when the pitch meeting is scheduled." 2 days later, I had my answer. Jason would be presenting to Landmark's board the following Thursday at 3 p.m. in the conference room of Williams Financial Advisors. "It's time," I told Frank that evening. "I've built the foundation. Now it's time to complete the structure." I spent the next week preparing, gathering documentation, rehearsing what I would say. This confrontation needed to be perfectly executed, firm but not vindictive, instructive rather than destructive. The day before the scheduled meeting, I sent a formal letter to Jason on Second Chance Construction letterhead, requesting a meeting to discuss a potential partnership opportunity at 2:30 p.m. on Thursday, just before his crucial pitch to Landmark Development. I knew his curiosity and business instincts wouldn't allow him to ignore such an opportunity, especially from a neighboring business whose identity had remained mysterious. That night, I barely slept, running through scenarios and possible reactions. By morning, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Whatever happened next, I had already succeeded in rebuilding my own life from the ashes of betrayal. That alone was a victory worth celebrating. As I dressed in my best suit, the one I had worn to Eleanor's funeral and Jason's college graduation, I thought about what she would say about all this. I could almost hear her voice. "Remember why you're doing this, Darren. Not for revenge, but for redemption. His and yours." With those words echoing in my mind, I straightened my tie and prepared to face my son for the first time since he had evicted me from my home. The lesson I was about to teach had been expensive, painful, and necessary. I only hoped he was finally ready to learn. Precisely at 2:30, I walked through the front doors of Williams Financial Advisors. The receptionist, a young woman I didn't recognize, looked up with a professional smile. "I have an appointment with Jason Williams," I stated calmly, "from Second Chance Construction." She checked her computer. "Yes, mister. I'm sorry. I don't have a name here." "Williams," I said. "Darren Williams." Her eyes widened slightly with recognition. Everyone in the office knew the story of Jason's father, though perhaps not the true version. "Mr. Williams is expecting you," she said after regaining her composure. "Conference room 3, down the hall on the right." I followed her directions, past glass offices where young associates pretended not to stare. The conference room was designed to impress, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and an expansive table of polished mahogany. What Jason hadn't expected was that I had arrived early and worked with Tony to prepare the room. On the walls hung framed photographs I had carefully selected. The original Williams construction team, standing proudly in front of our first major project. Jason at 16 helping me frame a house. Eleanor and me at the groundbreaking of our family home. Jason's college graduation with his parents beaming beside him. The day I had handed over the deed to our house, captured in what now seemed like cruel irony. I was seated at the head of the table when Jason entered, already speaking before he looked up. "I apologize for the tight schedule, but I have an important client meeting at 3, so we'll need to keep this." His voice trailed off as he registered who was waiting for him. "Dad?" The shock on his face would have been satisfying under different circumstances. Now it just felt necessary, a required step in the difficult process ahead. "Hello, Jason," I said evenly. "It's been a while." He remained frozen in the doorway, his briefcase clutched in a white-knuckled grip. "What are you doing here? How did you get access to our conference room?" "I'm the neighboring business owner who requested this meeting," I explained. "Second Chance Construction is mine." The color drained from his face as the implications sank in. "You've been next door this entire time? Watching me?" "Not watching," I corrected. "Building. Something you seem to have forgotten how to do." His shock gave way to defensive anger. "If this is some attempt at guilt-tripping me about the house, save it. That was a business decision, plain and simple." "Was it?" I gestured to the chair opposite me. "Please, sit down. You'll want to hear what I have to say before your meeting with Landmark Development." The mention of his prospective client caught his attention. Reluctantly, he took the indicated seat, placing his briefcase on the table between us like a shield. "How do you know about Landmark?" he demanded. "The construction community talks, Jason. Something your grandfather taught me, and I thought I had taught you. Reputation is everything." I opened a folder that had been sitting before me and removed several documents, laying them out methodically. "In the past 6 months, Second Chance Construction has repaired or completed 15 projects that were originally handled by contractors you referred to your clients." I slid the first document toward him, a spreadsheet detailing each project. Everyone had significant problems. Substandard materials, incomplete work, safety violations. Jason glanced at the paper but didn't touch it. "I'm not responsible for other contractors' work. When you receive kickbacks for referrals, you share the responsibility," I countered, placing another document before him. "This is a statement from the Andersons confirming the arrangement between you and Kimberly's cousin Paul." His jaw tightened. "You've been interfering with my clients?" "I've been helping people who were taken advantage of," I corrected. "Just as I've documented the pattern of investment advice you've given that consistently benefits your firm more than your clients." One by one, I laid out the evidence I had gathered: client testimonials, documentation of questionable practices, proof of the kickback schemes, copies of building code violations. Jason's face grew increasingly pale as the stack grew. "What do you want?" he finally asked, his voice barely audible. "Money? To ruin me?" I leaned back in my chair, studying the man my son had become. In his expensive suit and designer watch, he looked successful, but his eyes held the haunted look of someone who had lost his way. "I could have destroyed your business, Jason," I said quietly. "I had the evidence and the connections to do it. I could have reported these violations, gone public with the client complaints, made sure Landmark Development and every other potential client knew exactly what kind of business you're running." "Then, why didn't you?" he asked, genuine confusion breaking through his defensive facade. "Because you're still my son," I replied simply. "And because destruction isn't what I taught you. I taught you to build." I closed the folder and pushed the entire stack toward him. "These are copies. I have the originals secured elsewhere. You have two choices right now. You can face exposure for all of this, which would likely mean the end of Williams Financial Advisors and possibly criminal charges in some cases." Jason swallowed hard. Or you can accept my help to make things right, to rebuild your business and your character on a foundation of integrity, the way I raised you to operate. Your help comes with conditions," he guessed. I nodded. 3 conditions. First, a formal acknowledgement of what you did to me, including a sincere apology. Second, financial restitution, not for the full value of the house, but a fair percentage that will allow me to live independently for my remaining years. Third, family reconciliation, beginning with regular, unsupervised visits with my grandchildren. Jason's expression cycled through disbelief, anger, calculation, and finally, something that might have been the first glimmer of remorse. "You could have destroyed me," he repeated, almost to himself. "But I chose to teach you instead," I said. "The question is whether you're willing to learn." For several long moments, Jason stared at the stack of documents, the physical evidence of how far he had strayed from the values I had tried to instill in him. Then he looked up at the photographs on the wall, his gaze lingering on the image of Eleanor. "Mom would be ashamed of me," he said softly, unconsciously echoing the words I had thrown at him months ago. "She would be disappointed," I corrected gently. "But Eleanor always believed in redemption. So do I." "I don't deserve a second chance," Jason admitted, the first honest thing he had said to me in years. "None of us do," I replied. "That's why they're so valuable." What followed was a conversation unlike any we had ever had. Initially defensive, Jason eventually broke down as we confronted the reality of his choices. He admitted that financial pressures had been mounting for years, his lifestyle consistently exceeding his income. The house had seemed like an easy solution, a way to access equity without admitting his failures. "I told myself you would be better off in a smaller place," he confessed, "that I was helping you downsize. But that was just a justification." "And Kimberly?" I asked. Jason sighed. "She pushed for it, yes. But the decision was mine. I can't blame her for my choices." By the time the receptionist called to inform Jason that the Landmark Development executives had arrived, we had outlined a preliminary agreement. Jason would meet with them as planned, but with a new approach, focusing on honest financial guidance rather than flashy promises. "I don't know if I can change overnight," he admitted, as we prepared to conclude our meeting. "You don't have to," I assured him. "Real change takes time. But you have to start somewhere." As we stood to leave, Jason hesitated, then stepped forward and embraced me awkwardly, the first physical contact we had shared since the day he had handed me those garbage bags in the rain. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." The healing process began slowly. Jason missed our first scheduled meeting, old habits resurfacing in moments of stress. But he called to apologize and reschedule, a small step that signaled genuine effort. Over the following months, We established a pattern of regular consultations where I helped Jason identify and correct the ethical lapses in his business. Together, we reached out to clients who had been misled or poorly served, offering appropriate compensation and honest assessments of their financial situations. The financial restitution came in installments, beginning small but gradually increasing as Jason's business stabilized under a more ethical approach. I used the funds to secure a modest but comfortable home in a neighborhood not far from my grandchildren's school. The most meaningful progress came in the restoration of family connections. My first supervised visit with Thomas and Grace was awkward, the children uncertain how to interact with the grandfather who had abruptly disappeared from their lives. But children are remarkably resilient. By our third meeting, Thomas was excitedly sharing details about his baseball team, and Grace presented me with a drawing she had made. "It's Grandpa's new house," she explained shyly, pointing to a cheerful structure surrounded by flowers. "Mom says we can visit sometimes." That drawing now hangs framed in my living room, a symbol of new beginnings that emerged from painful endings. Last month, we celebrated Thanksgiving together as a family for the first time since the betrayal. The conversation was sometimes strained, the history between us impossible to completely forget. Kimberly remained distant, her participation more tolerated than embraced. But we were at the same table, sharing a meal and cautious conversation. After dinner, Jason and I stepped outside onto the porch, watching the first snow of the season begin to fall. "I almost lost everything," he said quietly. "Not just the business, but what really matters." "We all make mistakes," I replied. "The measure of a person isn't in never falling, but in how they rise afterward." Jason nodded, contemplating the gentle snowfall. "I keep thinking about what you did. You could have exposed me, ruined me. Instead, you found a way to help me learn." "That's what fathers do," I said simply. "Our relationship will never be what it once was. Some trust, once broken, can never be fully restored. The house I built with Eleanor is gone, transformed by new owners into something unrecognizable. These losses are permanent, scars that will always mark the landscape of our family. But something new has emerged from those ashes, a more honest relationship between father and son, a clearer understanding of what truly constitutes legacy, a recognition that homes are built of more than wood and nails, that true inheritance isn't measured in property deeds or bank accounts. I look at my son now and see a man in progress, someone trying to find his way back to the core values that were temporarily obscured by greed and insecurity. I see my grandchildren growing in the knowledge that mistakes, even terrible ones, don't have to be the end of the story. And I see myself, not as a victim of betrayal, but as a builder still, constructing meaning from difficulty, strength from adversity, wisdom from pain. What's your story of betrayal or forgiveness? Have you ever had to teach someone a difficult lesson about integrity? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story of rebuilding from betrayal resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life lessons. Remember, sometimes the most important construction project is rebuilding trust and integrity in our relationships. Thank you for listening to this chapter of my life, and may you build your own legacy on a foundation of unwavering values.